what is the most important archaeological discovery ever made? That's almost impossible to answer with a single choice. It really depends on your priorities. If you care about deciphering ancient languages, the Rosetta Stone is probably at the top of the list. Tutankhamun's tomb remains one of the greatest discoveries for understanding art, culture, and burial practices in ancient Egypt. If Latin American civilizations are your passion, Machu Picchu in Peru is likely your answer. For Chinese military and artistic history, the terracotta army stands out. Pompeii in Italy is arguably the greatest single find for geoarchaeology, and Lucy's fossilized skeleton from Ethiopia is perhaps the most critical discovery in evolutionary biology. And we haven't even touched on the Egyptian pyramids or Stonehenge, places so well known they almost go without saying. But if what you're looking for is one of the most pivotal turning points in humanity's cultural evolution, you don't need to travel far or look into the distant corners of the world. Because what you're looking for lies in the ancient heartland of Anatolia, in what is today southeastern Turkey, Göbeklitepe. Built approximately 11,600 years ago, this remarkable structure makes the 4,000-year-old Egyptian pyramids and 5,000-year-old Stonehenge look almost recent by comparison. So why did our ancestors feel the need to build something like this? Were they constructing a permanent shelter for the very first time? Was it an altar, a temple dedicated to their gods? Let's take a closer look. Göbeklitepe is located in southeastern Turkey, roughly 15 kilometers northeast of the city of Şanlıurfa, historically known as Urfa or Edessa. It was officially documented for the first time by German archaeologist and historian Klaus Schmidt in 1994. The hill itself, of course, was already known to local people. In the local Kurdish dialect, it was called Göbeklitepe, roughly meaning Potbelly Hill, and was considered a sacred place. About 30 years before Schmidt, in 1963, a joint survey by the University of Chicago and a Turkish university brought researchers to the region. A team led by American archaeologist Peter Benedict identified several stone tools during a surface survey and correctly classified them as belonging to the pre-pottery Neolithic period, roughly 10,000 years ago. But there was a problem. The team didn't realize they were standing on an ancient monumental site. At that point in history, it seemed inconceivable that nomadic peoples could have organized to build permanent structures. Some of the stones they found were actually the upper faces of Göbeklitepe's now famous T-shaped pillars poking out of the ground. The researchers mistook these horizontal slabs for ordinary gravestones and concluded that prehistoric remains in the area had simply been covered over by later human activity. To make matters more complicated, the land where Göbeklitepe stands had been used as farmland for generations. Local farmers, not knowing what lay beneath their feet, routinely moved, broke, and disturbed the upper layers of the site. One can hardly blame them. It was Klaus Schmidt in 1994 who revisited the 1963 survey report while searching for a new excavation site. When he walked the area and spotted limestone blocks similar to those unearthed at Nevelichori, a nearby Neolithic site, something clicked. Working in cooperation with Turkish archaeologists and international institutions, Schmidt turned the site into a formal excavation, and so one of the greatest discoveries in human history slowly began to emerge. The hill at Göbeklitepe isn't what most people picture when they think of a hill. A natural hill is formed gradually by wind or water, depositing dust and sediment over thousands of years. What makes places like Göbeklitepe special is that they formed around ancient human activity. Over generations, living spaces were buried by dust and debris. New layers were built on top of old ones, and over millennia, a mound, called a tel or hoyuk, formed. These artificial mounds are found across the ancient world, from Anatolia to Mesopotamia and beyond. Çatalhöyük, another famous site in Turkey, is one of the best-known examples. If you visited Göbeklitepe today, you'd see a roughly 1,500 square meter excavated area. But that's just a tiny window into something much larger. The mound itself spans about 300 meters in diameter and covers around 8 hectares, roughly the equivalent of 16 football pitches. Yet only a fraction of it has been excavated. This sometimes fuels speculation online. Why aren't they digging it all up? But the reality is quite ordinary in the world of archaeology. When dealing with a find this unique, archaeologists typically excavate a small portion first to understand what they're working with, minimizing the risk of irreversible damage. The tools available to these archaeologists are still relatively crude, and even well-intentioned excavation can permanently destroy fragile remains. Beyond the famous stone pillars, the surrounding soil contains an extraordinary density of smaller artifacts. Thanks to ground-penetrating radar technology, researchers already know that the site is 5 to 10 times larger than what's been uncovered so far. Geomagnetic surveys suggest there are around 20 unexcavated circular enclosures and more than 200 additional pillars still waiting underground. The most distinctive feature of the excavated sections is a series of circular or oval structures known as enclosures. Each enclosure is 10 to 20 meters in diameter and features 2 large monolithic T-shaped pillars at its center, surrounded by a ring of 6 to 12 smaller T-shaped pillars that define the boundary. Between some of the peripheral pillars, benches have been carved, places to sit. Each pillar stands between 3.5 and 6 meters tall and weighs anywhere from 5 to 20 tons. The central pillars are always taller and heavier than the surrounding ones. So far, 4 major enclosures have been uncovered, labeled A through D. Enclosures B, C, and D are particularly well preserved. Carbon-14 dating of organic material from across the site places its construction between approximately 9,130 and 7,370 BCE. Göbeklitepe is not a single construction project. It was built, buried, and rebuilt over the course of millennia. Many of the pillars are decorated with animal reliefs. The most common are mammals such as foxes, wild boars, lions, bulls, gazelles, and wild hares, reptiles like snakes and lizards, and birds including vultures, cranes, and owls. But not all animals appear equally. Peaceful prey animals, deer, ducks, are depicted far more often than dangerous predators like lions or snakes, and this detail will matter shortly. Most of the carvings are two-dimensional reliefs, but occasionally there are richly detailed three-dimensional sculptures as well. Geometric motifs, zigzags, chevrons, and hand and arm symbols also appear. Human figures are present too. In enclosure D, for instance, a headless human figure with visible male genitalia is carved beside a large duck. Perhaps the most striking detail is this. The T-shape of the pillars may not be purely architectural. At least in enclosure D, 2 of the central pillars appear to represent human figures. Belts and loincloths are carved onto their surfaces, and the horizontal top of each T seems to represent a human head. These pillars are not merely structural elements, they are also sculptures. Who they depict remains unknown. Since belts in other contemporary depictions seem to be a male marker, and the few animals whose sex can be determined are carved as males, these figures are believed to represent men. A solitary female figure exists at the site and is thought to have been added much later. This may suggest that patriarchal social structures have roots stretching back to this period. Some pillars show animals in isolation. Others present multiple figures in what appears to be a narrative scene, with certain figures given more prominence, suggesting deliberate storytelling or hierarchy. Beyond the enclosures themselves, the outer walls are flanked by small stone-built cubicles, many of which connect to each other internally. These were most likely used as platforms for observers during rituals, not as living quarters. Göbeklitepe was not built by extraterrestrials. The people who quarried the stone, shaped it, transported it, and erected it were human beings, our direct ancestors. And here is something important. We must stop imagining Stone Age people as primitive or mentally limited. The humans who built Göbeklitepe were, in terms of anatomy and cognitive capacity, identical to us. They buried their dead, crafted tools and jewelry, observed the stars, and wrestled with existential questions about life and death. There were almost certainly philosophers, inventors, and skilled craftspeople among them. Evidence of their methods is visible. Limestone quarries have been found within a few hundred meters of the site. Limestone is one of the easiest stones to cut and shape. Unfinished pillars and the hammerstones and chisels used to carve them have also been unearthed. There is no mystery about the how, just extraordinary human effort and organization. The full answer remains unknown, but 3 main hypotheses dominate the debate. The leading hypothesis today is that Göbeklitepe served as a communal meeting place, somewhere that hunter-gatherer bands from across a wide region came together at certain times of year, perhaps during seasonal transitions, to socialize, trade, exchange information, and maintain cultural bonds. If this is the case, we would expect to find smaller satellite sites nearby. And indeed, since Göbeklitepe's discovery, similar but smaller structures have been identified at nearby locations, sites that are structurally comparable but simpler and less elaborate. The geographical distribution of these sites suggests that Göbeklitepe functioned as a central hub among them. Schmidt himself described Göbeklitepe as a temple on a hill, and proposed that people may have traveled from as far as 150 kilometers away to perform religious rites there. His famous remark, "First came the temple, then the city." Several pieces of evidence support this view. The animal carvings on the pillars do not depict violent hunting scenes or wounded prey. Instead, non-threatening animals are far more common, which could point to a deliberate choice of purity or sanctity. The imagery may also reflect early shamanic belief. Before the concept of gods had fully formed, people may have begun attributing great powers to animals and natural forces to explain the terrifying and unpredictable world around them. Not all researchers agree, however. Some note that the carvings are highly naturalistic, The artists seem to have drawn what they saw around them rather than powerful supernatural beings. The occasional exaggerated figure, a scorpion drawn as large as a handbag, may reflect symbolic importance rather than full-blown mythology. The overall visual program doesn't have the kind of dominant central iconography we typically associate with religious art. If people gathered at Göbeklitepe at specific times of year, equinoxes, solstices, seasonal transitions, the builders may have oriented the structures according to stellar positions to mark these moments. Many ancient monumental sites around the world have astronomical alignments, and there's nothing about such a function that requires supernatural explanation. Our ancestors 10,000 years ago watched the same sky we do. Was Göbeklitepe ever a permanent home? Almost certainly not. None of the enclosures contain the markers archaeologists look for in living spaces. No hearths, no cooking vessels, no rubbish pits, no fertility figurines, no everyday tools. Only stone-cutting instruments were found. Analysis of over 100,000 bone fragments recovered from the site shows that virtually all of the animals consumed there were wild, not domesticated. This tells us that full-scale agriculture had not yet begun, making permanent settlement unlikely. One of the more puzzling aspects of Göbeklitepe is that several of its enclosures appear to have been deliberately buried by human hands at some point. This naturally invites speculation. Studies show that natural erosion and soil movement account for some of this. Rainfall caused gradual slippage. But evidence also suggests that people intentionally backfilled certain enclosures, perhaps as they built new ones and no longer needed the old ones. Whether this was a ritual act, a practical decision, or something else entirely, we don't know for certain. There are still more questions than answers. The meaning of specific carvings, obvious to people 10,000 years ago, is largely opaque to us today. How nomadic communities managed to coordinate the labor required for such a massive project remains unexplained. Whether the animal imagery represents totems, protective spirits, or something else is still debated. What we do know is that sometime between 8,000 and 7,000 BCE, roughly 2,000 to 3,000 years after its construction, Göbeklitepe gradually fell out of use. No new pillars were erected. Eventually, the site was abandoned entirely and slowly swallowed by the earth, where it would remain for nearly 10 millennia. This extraordinary place, asleep beneath the soil for thousands of years, is still waiting to be fully understood. Göbeklitepe is a window into the very moment our ancestors began the long journey that led, step by step, to the world we live in today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. See you in the next one.